Go ahead, the officer said with a crooked smile, the low buzz of electric clippers filling the holding room. Maybe now somebody'll finally listen to you. The fluorescent lights above Naomi Carter flickered softly, washing the gray concrete walls in a cold pale glow that made everything feel smaller than it was. The room smelled like stale coffee, wet uniforms, and industrial bleach. Somewhere down the hallway, a metal gate slammed shut with a hollow echo that rolled through the precinct like distant thunder. Naomi sat perfectly still on the narrow steel bench, her wrists resting quietly in her lap as dark strands of braided hair slid down the front of the plastic cape draped around her shoulders. One of the younger officers leaned against the counter filming with his phone, while another laughed under his breath. Just 12 hours earlier, she had been standing outside a convenience store on the south side of Baltimore, trying to stop a teenage boy from being shoved against a patrol car during an aggressive street search. The kid couldn't have been older than 16. Thin hoodie, white sneakers, terrified eyes. Naomi had stepped forward calmly, showing her legal aid badge and asking a simple question. Does he have the right to call his mother? Officer Daniel Reeves had looked at her like she was something stuck to the bottom of his boot. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver badge gleaming beneath the parking lot lights. Reeves carried the kind of confidence that came from years of nobody challenging him. Walk away, ma'am, he'd said flatly. But Naomi didn't walk away. She knew the law too well for that. For nearly 6 years, she'd worked as a community legal advocate helping low-income families navigate evictions, wrongful arrests, and abuse complaints nobody else wanted to touch. She had spent hundreds of nights sitting beside mothers in emergency rooms and teenagers in courthouse hallways. She knew exactly how fear looked when it settled into someone's chest, and she recognized it instantly in that boy's face. The officers claimed she was interfering, then resisting, then disturbing the peace. By midnight, Naomi was sitting inside Precinct 11 beneath flickering lights, while paperwork shuffled from one desk to another like nobody quite knew what to charge her with. Officer Travis Cole had been the first to recognize her name. Wait, he'd said, scrolling through his phone with a grin. This is the woman filing complaints against half the department. That changed the mood instantly. The room grew lighter somehow. Meaner. A joke passed between the officers that Naomi couldn't fully hear, followed by low laughter and sideways glances. Reeves loosened his tie slowly while staring at her through the bars. People like her always want attention, he said. Naomi could still remember the sound of rain tapping softly against the station windows when the clippers appeared. Not official procedure, punishment written anywhere. Just humiliation wrapped in casual laughter. Maybe this'll teach you some respect, Cole joked as the machine buzzed alive. Naomi felt the vibration near her temple first, then the sudden cool air against exposed skin. Her throat tightened for a moment, but she refused to lower her eyes. Her grandmother used to spend Sunday mornings braiding her hair in the kitchen while gospel music drifted through the apartment. Your hair tells the world who you are, she would whisper gently while parting each braid with careful fingers. Sitting there now under the humming lights, Naomi heard those words louder than the officers laughing around her. A few feet away, Officer Reeves folded his arms and watched in silence. But there was something different in his expression now. Not guilt. Not yet. Just curiosity. Because Naomi Carter wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. And somehow, that unsettled him more than anger ever could. The station finally grew quiet around 3:15 in the morning. Most of the laughter had faded into low conversations and tired footsteps echoing through the halls, but the cold inside Precinct 11 seemed to deepen with every passing hour. Naomi Carter sat alone beneath the humming fluorescent lights, her hands wrapped around a small paper cup of water that had long since gone warm. Tiny dark hairs still clung to the shoulders of her gray sweatshirt. Every time she moved, a few more strands slipped onto the bench beside her like reminders nobody could sweep away fast enough. Outside the narrow, reinforced window, rain streaked across the glass in silver lines under the glow of the parking lot lamps. Baltimore looked empty at this hour. Sidewalks, flickering traffic lights, steam rising from storm drains into the freezing night air. Naomi stared at her reflection in the window for several long seconds before finally reaching up and touching the uneven patch near the side of her head. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, from exhaustion. Across the booking desk, Officer Reeves signed paperwork without looking at her. His tie hung loose now, The sleeves of his uniform rolled halfway up his forearms. He looked tired too, but not in the same way. Naomi had spent years learning how to read men like him. Men who wore authority so long it stopped feeling like responsibility and started feeling like ownership. The dangerous ones were never the loudest. They were the calm ones. The ones who believed every line they crossed was justified because nobody had stopped them before. Reeves finally glanced up from the paperwork. "You could have gone home hours ago," he said flatly. Naomi leaned back slowly against the wall. That boy had rights. Reeves gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "You think standing in the middle of police business makes you a hero?" Naomi did not answer immediately. Somewhere deeper in the station, an old printer whined to life. A vending machine clicked. Then silence again. "No," she said softly. "I think pretending not to see something wrong makes people comfortable." That answer seemed to irritate him more than shouting would have. Reeves pushed the papers aside and stood, walking toward the bars with measured steps. His boots echoed sharply against the tile floor. "Always say the same thing," he muttered. "Victim. Abuse. Racism. Like the whole world is hunting you." Naomi lifted her eyes toward him slowly. There was no anger in her expression now, just something steadier, sadder. "You do not hear yourself anymore, do you?" she asked quietly. For the first time all night, Reeves hesitated. Just for a second. Then Officer Cole burst through the hallway doors carrying a plastic takeout bag, and the moment disappeared. "Man, the internet would eat this up," Cole joked while tossing fries onto the desk. "Activist lawyer gets a new haircut." Reeves shot him a quick glance. "Enough." Cole smirked. "What? You worried internal affairs might suddenly grow a conscience?" Nearly 20 minutes later, a female desk officer approached quietly with a property envelope in her hands. She looked younger than the others. Mid-20s maybe. Blonde hair pulled tightly beneath her cap. She avoided Naomi's eyes while unlocking the holding cell. "You are being released pending review," she said carefully. Naomi stood slowly, every muscle in her body stiff from the cold steel bench. The young officer handed over her phone, wallet, and legal aid badge. Their fingers brushed briefly, and the woman finally looked up. There was something unsettled in her expression, like she wanted to say something but did not know how. Naomi clipped the badge back onto her coat without speaking. As she walked toward the exit, Officer Reeves remained near the booking desk watching her silently. The automatic doors slid open with a sharp mechanical hiss, and freezing rain swept into the station lobby. Naomi stepped outside alone into the dark Baltimore morning, unaware that somewhere across the street, mounted beneath the awning of a closed liquor store, a security camera had captured far more than anyone inside Precinct 11 realized. By 7:30 that morning, Naomi Carter had still not gone to sleep. The tiny apartment smelled faintly of peppermint tea and rain-soaked fabric, the radiator clicking unevenly beside the kitchen window while weak gray daylight slowly filled the room. Her coat hung over the back of a chair near the door, still damp from the storm outside Precinct 11. Across the living room, an old television flickered silently with closed captions rolling beneath morning news anchors discussing traffic delays and city politics nobody really cared about. Naomi sat cross-legged on the bathroom counter wearing an oversized sweatshirt, staring at her reflection beneath the soft yellow vanity light. The uneven patches along her scalp looked harsher in daylight. Smaller curls clung stubbornly near the back of her neck, while the rest remained rough and exposed. For a long moment, she simply stared at herself without blinking. Then slowly, she reached for the electric razor resting beside the sink. The buzzing sound filled the tiny bathroom instantly. Calm, mechanical, final. Small dark pieces of hair drifted into the white porcelain basin as Naomi guided the razor carefully across the remaining sections of her scalp. No hesitation now. No trembling hands. Just quiet control. Outside, sirens wailed faintly several blocks away before fading into the distance. Somewhere upstairs, a child laughed. Life continuing like nothing had happened at all. Naomi switched off the razor and ran her palm gently across her head. Smooth. Cool. Unhidden. The woman staring back at her no longer looked exhausted. She looked awake. Her phone vibrated against the bathroom counter. 3 missed calls. 12 unread texts. 1 voicemail from her coworker Denise Harper. Naomi pressed play. "Girl, call me right now." Denise's voice said breathlessly through static. Somebody leaked something online. Naomi frowned slightly and stepped into the living room, grabbing the remote from the couch. The television volume rose sharply. Footage connected to allegations involving officers from Precinct 11 began circulating overnight. Naomi froze. The news station cut to shaky cell phone footage recorded from across the street outside the police station. Rain streaked through the frame beneath flickering parking lot lights while two blurred officers stood near the side entrance smoking cigarettes. Their voices carried faintly through the storm. "She should be grateful we did not charge her," one man laughed. Another voice answered, lower this time. "Reeves went too far." Naomi's chest tightened. The clip ended abruptly, but the anchor continued speaking. Civil rights organizations are now requesting a formal investigation into the treatment of community advocate Naomi Carter after reports surfaced alleging misconduct during her detention late Tuesday night. "This is Allison Green with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. We would like to speak with you immediately." Naomi sat motionless for a second. Rain tapped softly against the apartment windows while the television continued murmuring in the background. "How did you get this number?" she asked quietly. "Because somebody sent us footage from inside the station," Allison replied. Naomi's pulse slowed instead of rising. That surprised her most. Fear should have been the first emotion, but it was not fear settling into her chest now. It was recognition, like standing at the edge of something she had unknowingly been walking toward for years. Across town inside Precinct 11, Officer Daniel Reeves stood alone in the break room gripping a styrofoam coffee cup so tightly the lid bent beneath his fingers. The television mounted near the vending machines replayed Naomi's photo beside the words "investigation requested" flashing in bold red letters across the screen. Officer Cole stormed into the room looking pale. "Tell me you did not touch the security archive," he snapped. Reeves did not answer immediately. He kept staring at the screen where Naomi appeared stepping out of the station beneath pouring rain, shoulders straight despite everything. Then finally, very quietly, he muttered 4 words that made Cole's expression change instantly. There was another camera. The rain finally stopped just after noon, leaving Baltimore wrapped in that strange gray stillness that always came after a storm. Sidewalks shimmered beneath weak sunlight, while dirty puddles collected along cracked curbs and subway entrances. Naomi Carter stood outside the federal building downtown with both hands tucked into the pockets of her wool coat, staring up at the rows of dark reflective windows stretching nearly 20 stories above her. The cold wind moved gently across her bare scalp, and for the first time since leaving Precinct 11, she stopped trying to hide it. People looked, some with sympathy, some with curiosity. Others quickly looked away the moment they realized she noticed. Inside the lobby, polished marble floors reflected the pale afternoon light, while security scanners hummed quietly near the entrance. Television mounted above the reception desk replayed the same headline over and over. "Community advocate demands answers after detention incident." Naomi barely glanced at it. A woman in a navy blazer approached from the elevators carrying a thin leather folder pressed tightly against her side. "Miss Carter?" Naomi nodded once. Allison Green looked younger in person than she sounded over the phone. Mid-30s maybe. Sharp eyes. Calm posture. The kind of person who had learned how to stay composed inside difficult rooms. "Thank you for coming," Allison said quietly. Naomi followed her toward the elevators without speaking. The federal conference room on the 14th floor smelled faintly of fresh coffee and printer toner. Long windows overlooked the harbor where cargo cranes rose against the cloudy skyline, like giant metal skeletons frozen above the water. 2 investigators sat waiting near the far end of the table beside open laptops and stacks of printed documents. One of them, an older black man with silver-framed glasses, stood immediately when Naomi entered. "I am Marcus Hale," he said, extending his hand carefully. "Civil Rights Division." Naomi shook it once. Firm. Controlled. Marcus gestured toward the chair nearest the window. "Please sit." Naomi lowered herself slowly into the chair while Allison placed a tablet at the center of the table. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody pushed papers toward her demanding signatures. That alone felt unfamiliar after the last 24 hours. Marcus folded his hands together. "Miss Carter," he began calmly, "before we ask any questions, you need to understand something clearly. What happened inside that station may not be an isolated incident." Naomi looked up sharply. Marcus tapped the tablet screen once. Security footage appeared instantly. Grainy black and white video from inside a hallway at Precinct 11 dated nearly 8 months earlier. A young black man stood near the booking desk while officers laughed about something outside camera range. Another clip followed. Then another. Different faces. Different nights. Same station. Same mocking smiles. Naomi felt something cold settle beneath her ribs. "We have received complaints for years," Allison said quietly. "But complaints disappear when witnesses get intimidated or evidence goes missing." Marcus slid a thin folder across the table toward Naomi. Until now. Naomi opened it slowly. Inside were printed screenshots from social media, internal emails, disciplinary records, and civilian complaints. Names highlighted in red appeared repeatedly across the pages. Reeves. Cole. Precinct 11. Her eyes stopped suddenly on one photograph near the bottom. Officer Reeves standing beside city officials during a police reform fundraiser, smiling confidently beneath bright ballroom lights. Naomi stared at the image for several long seconds before speaking. "You already knew about him." Marcus did not answer immediately. The silence itself felt like confirmation. Outside the conference room windows, low clouds drifted slowly above the harbor, while distant sirens echoed somewhere far below in the city streets. Allison leaned forward carefully. "The footage from last night changes things," she said, "especially if the missing internal recording still exists." Naomi's expression tightened slightly. "You think somebody kept it?" "Sir," the young desk officer whispered shakily. "Somebody copied the bodycam footage before the archive was wiped." By early evening, the city no longer belonged to Naomi Carter alone. Her face was everywhere now. On television screens mounted inside crowded diners. Across social media feeds glowing in dark bedrooms. On giant monitors above the subway platforms where exhausted commuters paused beneath flickering lights to watch the same grainy footage replay again and again. Community advocate speaks out after detention incident. Some people called her brave. Others called her difficult. Angry. Dangerous. Naomi sat near the window inside her apartment while Baltimore shifted into night outside, blue police lights occasionally reflecting against the wet pavement 3 stories below. Her phone had not stopped vibrating for hours. Journalists, activists, lawyers, old classmates she had not spoken to in years. Even strangers leaving voicemails filled with trembling voices and painful stories that sounded too familiar. "They did something similar to my brother. Nobody believed me either. Please do not back down." Naomi listened to only a few before placing the phone face down on the kitchen table. The apartment felt heavier now, smaller somehow. Like every wall carried the weight of people expecting her to become stronger overnight, just because cameras were finally paying attention. A soft knock came at the door around 7:20. Naomi opened it slowly and found Denise Harper standing in the hallway holding 2 grocery bags and a paper cup carrier from the coffee shop downstairs. Denise froze the moment she saw her fully under the hallway light. Not pity, not shock, just silence. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Naomi carefully, without saying a word. Naomi closed her eyes for one brief second. That almost broke her more than anything else had. They sat together at the tiny kitchen table drinking coffee while rainwater dripped steadily from the fire escape outside the window. Denise stirred cream into her cup slowly. "You know what makes people uncomfortable?" she asked quietly. Naomi looked up. Denise gave a sad smile. "Dignity. Especially when they tried real hard to take it from you." Naomi glanced toward the television where another panel discussion played beneath bright studio lights. One commentator shook his head dismissively. "There is still no verified evidence of misconduct inside the station." Another interrupted. "But if footage exists," Naomi muted the television instantly. Silence filled the apartment again except for the low hum of traffic outside. Then her phone buzzed once more. This time it was not a call. Just a message from an unknown number. "Check your email before they delete it too." Naomi's expression tightened immediately. Denise noticed it. "What?" Naomi stood and crossed quickly toward her laptop resting near the couch. Her inbox refreshed slowly beneath the dim screen glow. One unread message appeared with no subject line. No sender name. Just a single attached file labeled bodycam_1187_final. Naomi stopped breathing for a second. Her fingers hovered above the trackpad, while the room suddenly felt impossibly still. "Open it," Denise whispered softly. Naomi clicked the file. The video loaded shakily. Dim station hallway. Distorted audio. Then Officer Cole's voice laughing somewhere off camera. Man, she still thinks anybody cares. Another voice answered closer this time. Reeves. Calm. Sharp. Keep the camera down. Naomi stared without blinking as the footage continued. She saw herself sitting silently beneath the fluorescent lights while officers moved casually around the room. Then the audio shifted. A younger female voice spoke nervously near the desk. Sir, this is not procedure. Reeves answered immediately. Then maybe you did not see anything. Denise covered her mouth quietly beside her. The footage continued for another 40 seconds before ending abruptly. No graphic images. No screaming. Somehow that made it worse. Casual cruelty always sounded colder when nobody bothered hiding it. Naomi leaned back slowly against the couch cushions while the laptop screen reflected faintly across her eyes. Crosstown inside Precinct 11. Officer Reeves stood in the dark archive room surrounded by rows of metal evidence shelves while sweat gathered beneath the collar of his uniform despite the cold air. Officer Cole paced beside him anxiously. Tell me that is the only copy, Cole muttered. Reeves did not answer. He kept staring at the empty slot where the missing evidence drive should have been. Then the archive room door creaked softly open behind them. The young female desk officer stepped inside, clutching her badge tightly in trembling hands. Reeves turned slowly toward her. And for the first time since this began, somebody inside Precinct 11 finally looked afraid of him. The city felt quieter the next morning, but it was not peace. It was anticipation, the kind that settles over a place right before something breaks open. Low clouds drifted above downtown Baltimore, while television vans lined the street outside the federal courthouse, their satellite dishes pointed toward the gray sky, like metal flowers waiting to bloom. Naomi Carter stood alone beside her apartment window holding a steaming mug between both hands as weak sunlight spread slowly across the rooftops outside. She had barely slept. Every few minutes another notification lit up her phone across the kitchen counter. Interviews requested. Statements demanded. Arguments exploding online between strangers who suddenly treated her pain like a political debate. Naomi ignored all of it. The apartment remained still except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the distant rumble of traffic below. She wore loose gray sweatpants and one of her old college sweatshirts, the faded letters nearly peeling away after years of washing. Her bare scalp reflected softly in the glass as she stared out at the city waking beneath the morning haze. At first, seeing herself like this had felt unbearable. Now it felt different. Honest somehow. The sound of a kettle clicking off in the kitchen pulled her attention away. Denise stood near the stove pouring hot water into 2 bowls of instant oatmeal, while the local news murmured quietly from the television. Denise carried one bowl over carefully and sat beside Naomi on the couch. Neither woman spoke for a while. The silence between them did not feel empty. It felt tired. Human. Finally, Denise looked toward her gently. You know they are going to try to destroy your name before court, she said softly. Naomi nodded once. I know. You ready for that? Naomi stared down into the oatmeal for several seconds before answering. No, she admitted quietly. But I am more tired of pretending this only happened to me. Denise leaned back slowly, studying her friend beneath the pale morning light. That right there, she whispered, is why they picked the wrong woman. Across town inside Precinct 11, nobody was laughing anymore. The station felt colder now despite the overheating radiators rattling near the booking desk. Officers moved carefully through the halls avoiding eye contact while reporters crowded outside the barricades near the entrance. Officer Reeves stood inside his office with the blinds closed, jacket removed, tie hanging crooked around his neck. Desk was buried beneath stacks of reports and legal notices. Internal affairs interviews scheduled. Evidence requests pending. Administrative review. Every few minutes his office phone rang again. Reeves ignored most of them. The young desk officer, Emily Turner, sat across from him gripping a paper cup with shaking hands. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. Reeves stared at her for a long moment before speaking. You made a mistake, he said flatly. Emily swallowed hard. No, she whispered. Quiet too long. That was the mistake. Reeves exhaled sharply through his nose and turned toward the dark window behind his desk. Outside, camera flashes flickered through the blinds like distant lightning. You think they care about her? He muttered bitterly. This city forgets everything after 2 weeks. Emily looked down at the floor before answering quietly. Maybe, But the video does not. That landed harder than he expected. Reeves remained silent. Somewhere down the hallway, a television replayed Naomi's image again beside the scrolling headline "Civil Rights Hearing Expected This Week." Meanwhile, inside her apartment, Naomi opened the folder Marcus Hale had left with her the night before. Civilian complaints, witness statements, names, dates, faces. One photograph showed a teenage boy sitting outside the same station 2 years earlier with tears running silently down his face while officers laughed nearby. Naomi touched the edge of the photograph carefully. Then she closed the folder and looked toward the courthouse visible faintly across the city skyline through her apartment window. The hearing was less than 48 hours away now, and for the first time since this began, Naomi realized something important. This was no longer about humiliation. It was about witnesses, about memory, about whether truth could survive long enough for somebody powerful to finally hear it out loud. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and colorless, the kind of Baltimore morning where the wind cut sharply between buildings and every breath turned pale beneath the courthouse steps. News vans crowded the sidewalks before sunrise, their headlights reflecting across wet pavement while reporters rehearsed opening lines beneath heavy winter coats. Metal barricades lined the entrance as protesters gathered quietly on opposite sides of the street, holding signs that trembled gently in the wind. Some carried pictures of loved ones lost to police violence. Others simply stood in silence watching the courthouse doors like something sacred was about to happen inside. Naomi Carter stepped out of a black sedan just after 8:10 in the morning. The moment her shoes touched the sidewalk, every camera turned toward her at once. Flashes burst across the gray air in rapid waves. Questions exploded from every direction. Naomi, do you believe the officers should be fired? Did the department contact you privately? Is there more footage? Naomi did not answer. She wore a fitted white suit beneath a charcoal wool coat, her head uncovered despite the freezing wind moving across the bare skin above her forehead. No wig, no scarf, no attempt to hide what had happened. Denise walked beside her quietly, while Marcus Hale and Allison Green followed close behind carrying thick case files against their chests. Courthouse doors opened with a low mechanical hum, and suddenly the noise outside disappeared behind them like a wave collapsing. Inside, the federal courtroom felt colder than the street. High ceilings, dark wooden benches, soft yellow lights glowing against polished walls worn smooth by decades of silence and judgment. Every seat was filled. Journalists lined the back rows beside civil rights attorneys and city officials pretending not to stare at one another. Naomi paused briefly near the entrance as whispers moved through the room in uneven currents. Then she saw him. Officer Daniel Reeves sat at the defense table wearing a navy suit instead of his uniform for the first time since she had known him. He looked older now somehow, smaller. The confidence that once lived easily in his posture seemed buried beneath the tension tightening his jaw. Beside him sat Officer Cole, staring rigidly at the table without lifting his eyes once. Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered exactly at 8:30 sharp, her black robe moving softly behind her as the courtroom rose together in silence. "Be seated." Her voice was calm, but carried effortlessly through the room. Naomi lowered herself into the witness chair near the front, while Marcus arranged documents beside her carefully. Across the courtroom, Reeves finally looked directly at Naomi for the first time since the station. Neither spoke. Neither looked away quickly. The hearing began quietly. Procedural language, evidence summaries, formal statements delivered in measured tones. But the atmosphere shifted the moment Marcus Hale stood and requested permission to submit newly recovered body cam footage into evidence. Every sound inside the courtroom seemed to disappear at once. Judge Whitmore adjusted her glasses slowly. "Proceed." Marcus connected the evidence drive to the courtroom monitor while reporters leaned forward almost instinctively. Naomi felt her heartbeat steady instead of rise. Strange. She had expected fear. Instead, she felt clarity. The video began playing across the large courtroom screen. Dim fluorescent lighting. Booking desk. Officers laughing somewhere beyond camera range. Naomi sitting silently beneath the harsh station lights while pieces of dark hair rested against the floor near her shoes. Nobody in the courtroom moved. Nobody even coughed. Then the audio sharpened suddenly. Officer Cole's voice echoed clearly through the speakers. "Man, she still thinks anybody cares." A few people in the gallery lowered their eyes immediately. Reeves stared straight ahead without blinking. The footage continued. Emily Turner's nervous voice. Reeves answering coldly. Then maybe you did not see anything. Judge Whitmore removed her glasses slowly. The silence inside the courtroom deepened into something physical now. Heavy. Suffocating. Then the final clip appeared unexpectedly. Security footage from outside the station. Reeves standing beneath the rain, near the side entrance, speaking quietly to another officer. Nobody is going to believe her anyway. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Somewhere in the back row, somebody gasped softly. Naomi did not react. She simply sat there beneath the courtroom lights while every person inside finally saw what humiliation looked like when nobody thought the cameras mattered. For several long seconds after the final video ended, nobody inside the courtroom moved. The monitor screen reflected pale blue light across rows of stunned faces while the faint hum of the projector echoed softly through the silence. Judge Eleanor Whitmore remained perfectly still behind the bench, her glasses resting untouched beside folded hands. Even the reporters in the back had stopped typing. Naomi Carter sat upright beneath the courtroom lights with her hands resting calmly in her lap, but inside her chest something strange was happening. Not victory, not satisfaction. Just release. Like carrying a weight for years and suddenly realizing other people could finally see it too. Across the room, Officer Daniel Reeves looked down at the polished wood table in front of him as though it might somehow shield him from the eyes surrounding him now. The confidence that once wrapped around him like armor had disappeared completely. Officer Cole shifted nervously beside him, loosening his collar while whispers spread quietly through the gallery seats behind them. Then Judge Whitmore finally spoke. Officer Reeves, she said evenly, is there any part of this footage you claim has been altered? Reeves opened his mouth slightly, but no words came out. His attorney leaned toward him quickly, whispering something under his breath, but Reeves barely seemed to hear it. His eyes drifted toward Naomi for one brief moment before lowering again. No, Your Honor, he answered quietly. The admission landed heavily inside the room. Marcus Hale stood slowly from the prosecution table and walked toward the center aisle carrying a thin folder beneath one arm. Your Honor, he said calmly, Miss Carter is not the first civilian connected to Precinct 11 to report humiliation, intimidation, or evidence suppression. Young men, mothers, teenagers, ordinary people who had once stood exactly where she sat now hoping somebody powerful might finally listen. A movement near the back of the courtroom suddenly drew everyone's attention. Emily Turner rose slowly from the last bench near the side wall, her hands trembling so visibly she almost dropped the folded statement she carried. The courtroom shifted uneasily as she stepped forward beneath dozens of watching eyes. Reeves turned sharply toward her. Emily, he warned quietly. She stopped walking for a second. Fear crossed her face openly now. But then she looked toward Naomi, and something steadied inside her expression. I need to speak, she whispered. Judge Whitmore nodded once. Emily moved to the witness stand carefully, smoothing the sleeves of her uniform jacket with nervous fingers before sitting down. Her voice shook at first. There were other recordings, she admitted softly. Other complaints too. Reeves closed his eyes briefly. Emily swallowed hard and continued. Sometimes reports disappeared before Internal Affairs reviewed them. Sometimes body cam files got labeled corrupted. She looked down into her lap. People joked about it inside the station, like it was normal. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody even shifted in their seats. Emily finally turned toward Naomi fully. Tears filled her eyes now. I am sorry, she said quietly. I should have said something sooner. Naomi stared at her for several seconds without speaking. The entire courtroom seemed to wait for anger, for blame, for revenge sharpened into words. But Naomi only shook her head gently. Fear keeps people silent, she said softly. That is how this survives. Emily lowered her face into trembling hands. Somewhere behind them, a camera shutter clicked once before stopping again. Judge Whitmore removed her glasses slowly and looked directly toward Reeves. Effective immediately, she said firmly. This court recommends suspension pending full federal investigation into misconduct, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations connected to Precinct 11. Reeves finally looked up then. Truly looked up. Not at the judge. Not at the lawyers. At Naomi. And for the first time since this began, there was no arrogance left in his expression. Only the hollow realization of a man understanding too late that humiliation becomes dangerous the moment the world finally decides to witness it. When the hearing finally ended, nobody rushed for the doors right away. The courtroom remained suspended in that strange, heavy silence that only comes after truth settles into a room too large to ignore it anymore. Porters lowered their cameras slowly. Attorneys gathered papers without speaking above whispers. Even the old ceiling lights seemed softer now against the dark polished wood lining the walls. Naomi Carter stood carefully from the witness chair, smoothing one hand across the front of her white suit, while Marcus Hale collected the final case folders beside her. Across the room, Officer Daniel Reeves remained seated alone at the defense table long after his attorney stepped away to answer questions near the hallway. His shoulders looked smaller now beneath the courtroom lights, his face pale and exhausted in a way Naomi barely recognized. For a moment, she simply watched him quietly. Not with hatred, not even with satisfaction, just understanding. Because people like Reeves never imagined humiliation until they became visible inside it themselves. Denise touched Naomi gently on the arm. "You okay?" Naomi looked toward the tall courthouse windows where weak afternoon sunlight stretched across the marble floor in long pale reflections. "Think so," she answered softly. Outside the courthouse, the winter air felt cleaner somehow. Colder too. Television crews crowded the bottom of the stone steps, while microphones rose instantly the moment Naomi appeared beside Marcus and Denise. Questions came fast again. "Naomi, do you believe justice was served today? Do you want criminal charges filed? What would you say to Officer Reeves right now?" Naomi paused halfway down the courthouse steps while wind moved softly across her bare scalp. Behind the barricades, dozens of strangers watched her silently. Some held signs. Others simply stood there with tears shining in tired eyes. Naomi noticed an older black woman near the front clutching the hand of a teenage boy wearing a school backpack. The boy stared at Naomi for a long moment before quietly straightening his shoulders. That almost made her emotional more than the hearing itself. Naomi stepped toward the microphone slowly. The cameras waited. The city waited. "People keep asking if today was about revenge," she said calmly. Her voice carried across the courthouse plaza without needing to rise. It was not. The crowd remained perfectly still. Naomi glanced briefly toward the courthouse doors behind her before continuing. "Humiliation survives in silence. That is what this was really about. Not just what happened to me. What happens when people learn to stop seeing each other as human." Several reporters lowered their pens. Others simply listened. Naomi folded her hands lightly in front of her coat as the wind tugged softly against the fabric. "I do not need people to feel sorry for me," she said quietly. "I need this city to remember the names that never made headlines because nobody recorded their pain in time." The silence that followed felt deeper than applause ever could. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang faintly across downtown Baltimore. One slow note at a time. Naomi stepped away from the microphones before anyone could ask another question. Cameras flashed behind her as she descended the final courthouse steps into the pale afternoon sunlight. Near the sidewalk, Emily Turner stood waiting alone beside a concrete pillar, still wearing her police uniform beneath a long winter coat. Her eyes looked swollen from crying. Naomi slowed slightly as she approached. Emily swallowed hard. "I do not expect forgiveness," she whispered. Naomi studied her face carefully for several seconds. Then she answered in the gentlest voice Emily had heard all week. "Good people become dangerous when fear matters more than truth." Emily lowered her eyes immediately. Naomi did not say anything else. She simply walked past her toward the waiting car at the curb while cold wind moved through the city streets around them. Above the courthouse entrance, dozens of American flags fluttered softly against the gray sky. Reporters still shouted questions behind her. Cameras still flashed. But Naomi no longer heard any of it clearly. She only heard the sound of her own footsteps against the stone sidewalk and the quiet, steady rhythm of a city finally being forced to witness what it had ignored for far too long. The black sedan pulled away from the courthouse. Naomi rested her head lightly against the window and watched Baltimore drift slowly past beneath the fading winter light. And for the first time since the Clippers buzzed alive inside that holding room, nobody was laughing anymore.